Have you ever wondered why silence unsettles men more than words ever could? Why the woman who chooses not to shout, not to plead, not to waste herself in endless arguments becomes the very figure he cannot erase from memory? It is because silence, when chosen consciously, has the weight of eternity behind it. It is not absence, it is presence intensified. And for a man who thrives on control, validation, or the soothing illusion of being indispensable, her silence becomes a mirror that reveals truths he never wanted to face. The woman who walks away from drama is not weak. She is not avoiding confrontation out of fear. She is embodying the archetype of restraint, the wisdom of the ancient Stoics, and the mystery of the anima within Jungian thought. She does not scream because she does not need to. She does not justify because she owes no explanation. In her quiet, she carries a gravitational pull that unsettles the masculine psyche, because silence in its purest form cannot be manipulated. It cannot be argued with. It simply exists, and its existence is power. Carl Jung understood that the unconscious holds within it the shadows we fear to name. For many men, a woman's silence projects onto him his own unspoken inadequacies. It reminds him of the maternal wound he carries, the mother who withheld affection, the love that was conditional, the approval always just out of reach. Her silence reawakens those buried traumas, and suddenly he is no longer standing before her, but before every rejection, every wound, every abandonment he never healed. He obsesses not because she punished him, but because she left him alone with himself. And that is a punishment far greater than any outburst could inflict. You must understand this. Silence is not passivity. Silence is a decision. The woman who chooses it is declaring that her energy, her dignity, her spirit are not bargaining chips to be thrown into the chaos of arguments that only drain her soul. She knows that the more she explains herself, the less she is understood. She knows that the man who truly sees her does not require her to shout her worth. And so she chooses silence, not because she has nothing to say, but because her presence says more than words ever could. Men are wired to seek resolution. They want to close the circle, to win or lose, to label the ending so that it can be filed away. But when a woman withdraws into silence, she denies him that closure. She leaves the circle open, incomplete, eternal. His mind cannot stop circling around it, because the masculine ego fears the void more than it fears confrontation. And silence is the void, expansive, endless, impossible to conquer. He obsesses not over what she said, but over what she left unsaid. The possibilities haunt him. The unanswered questions become louder than any accusation could. Think of the Stoic philosophers, Marcus Aurelius writing that the best answer to anger is silence, or Seneca reminding us that no insult harms unless we choose to feel it. This woman is aligned with that wisdom. She embodies the discipline of detachment, the mastery of the inner world. She does not feed chaos because chaos only grows when it is nourished. Instead, she starves it, and in starving it, she transcends it. Her silence is not emptiness, it is transcendence. But do not mistake this silence for indifference. There is fire in it, a quiet flame that refuses to be extinguished by trivial storms. The Jungian anima speaks through her stillness, radiating a mystery that no man can fully possess. And in that mystery lies the root of his obsession, because man is drawn to what he cannot define, to what he cannot cage. He returns in thought, in memory, in dream, not because she begged him to stay, but because she never fought to keep him. Her silence whispered, "I do not need you to validate me." And those words, unsaid yet thunderous, become the echo he cannot escape. This is the paradox. The woman who speaks too much is easily dismissed. The woman who clings too tightly is easily forgotten. But the woman who chooses silence over drama, who lets her absence carry the weight of her presence, becomes unforgettable. She becomes the wound he cannot heal, the enigma he cannot solve, the mirror he cannot shatter. And in that mirror he sees himself exposed, vulnerable, incomplete. You may not realize it yet, but silence can be your greatest weapon, your shield, your temple. It does not need applause. It does not need recognition. It does not need him to understand. It is enough that you know, enough that you choose, because in silence there is sovereignty, and sovereignty is the essence of feminine power that men, whether they admit it or not, will always crave and always fear. The silence a woman chooses is not empty space. It is a living presence, a cathedral of self-respect that reverberates louder than any argument. It is the quiet refusal to dance in the theater of chaos, the disciplined withdrawal from the battlefield where nothing is ever truly won. And for the man left standing in the noise of his own unhealed shadows, that silence becomes unbearable, because when words cease, he is forced to listen, not to her, but to himself. And most men are terrified of what echoes back when the distraction of conflict is gone. Jung wrote that what we repress does not vanish. It waits, and then it emerges in projections and obsessions. The man who cannot let go of the silent woman is not clinging to her body or even her love. He is clinging to the projection she awakened in him. Her silence became a canvas onto which he painted every insecurity, every unspoken guilt, every hunger for the mother's embrace he never received, every fear of inadequacy he tried to bury under bravado. She is not the cause, she is the mirror. Yet because her silence denies him the illusion of control, he cannot put the mirror down. And here is the truth many do not want to confront. Obsession often grows not out of love, but out of unresolved shadow. The woman who yells, pleads, and chases allows a man to dismiss her as emotional, irrational, or desperate. She becomes a character in his narrative, something he can categorize, explain, and discard. But the woman who withdraws into dignified silence becomes uncategorizable. She slips beyond the grasp of his ego, beyond the neat compartments where he keeps his victories and his failures. And that which cannot be explained becomes unforgettable. You, listening to these words, may have been conditioned to believe that silence is weakness, that if you do not explain yourself, you will be misunderstood, erased, forgotten. But the opposite is true. Silence chosen with intention is the language of power. It says, I do not need to prove, I do not need to persuade, I do not need to lower myself into battles that diminish me. It is the ultimate test of self-worth, to let someone's misunderstanding stand, uncorrected, because you know who you are. Can you imagine the strength that takes? Can you see why such strength unsettles the masculine psyche? Think of Epictetus, the Stoic slave-turned-philosopher who said, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. This is the essence of the silent woman's strength. She does not chase the illusion of being perfectly understood. She allows herself to be misinterpreted, because her worth does not depend on external clarity. In doing so, she rises above the need for validation. And, paradoxically, that is why she lingers in his mind long after others are forgotten, because she is the one who did not bow to the tyranny of being explained. Silence, too, is erotic in a way words can never be. It cloaks the feminine in mystery, a mystery that Jung identified as the anima, the archetype of woman who represents the soul itself. A man confronted with such silence feels that he has touched something sacred, something beyond his control. He obsesses not over her voice, but over the absence of it, the stillness that makes him wonder what truths lie beneath her composure. He imagines, he questions, he dreams, and in those imaginations she becomes larger than life. He cannot let go, because in truth he never truly possessed her. And here lies the psychological trap. The more he obsesses, the more his ego insists that he must resolve the riddle of her silence. He must win back her attention, her words, her explanation. But every attempt only deepens the void, because silence cannot be conquered, it can only be accepted. And the male psyche, trained by culture to conquer, to fix, to solve, cannot rest in acceptance. Thus, she becomes his endless paradox. The more silent she is, the louder her presence becomes in his unconscious. Perhaps you feel this truth in your bones. Perhaps you have tried every form of noise, arguments, explanations, endless texts to make yourself seen, and only ended up invisible. What if the true path to being unforgettable lies not in more noise, but in less? What if the silence you fear is actually the force that sets you free? The silent woman does not disappear, she ascends, and the man who once took her for granted will forever feel the weight of her absence. For him, the silence is haunting. For her, it is liberation, and liberation is the deepest form of power a woman can hold, the kind of power that cannot be given, only claimed. There is a moment in every man's life when he encounters silence not as emptiness, but as judgment. The kind of judgment that does not shout, does not accuse, does not even point a finger, because it doesn't need to. Silence is the purest verdict, and when a woman withdraws into it, she forces him to stand before his own conscience with no shield, no distraction, no noise to drown it out. The drama he once used to hide behind has vanished. He is left alone with himself. That is why he cannot let go. She made him see what he had spent his whole life avoiding. Jung often wrote about the shadow, the parts of ourselves we bury because they are too painful, too shameful, too disruptive to face. But silence has a way of summoning those shadows out of hiding. For a man, the silent woman becomes an archetypal force, almost mythic, dragging his unacknowledged darkness into the light. And the truth is, he obsesses not because of who she is, but because of what she awakened. Her absence became an initiation into his own depths, and the deeper he looks, the more he realizes she left, behind something no other woman gave him, the confrontation with his own soul. This is why he remembers her differently. This is why his mind returns to her in quiet moments, in sleepless nights, in the pauses between distractions. Other women may have shouted, begged, or demanded explanations. They gave him closure, even if painful, but the silent woman gave him none. She handed him back to himself, like a mirror polished so clean it cut him to look into it. Her silence was not abandonment. It was revelation, and revelation never fades. Do you see the paradox now? The world teaches you to chase, to explain, to make your presence undeniable through noise, but noise dies quickly. It burns bright and then it is gone. Silence endures. Silence spreads. Silence seeps into the cracks of memory and becomes the air someone breathes without realizing it. When you choose silence, you choose to become unforgettable, not through force, but through absence. And absence, when intentional, becomes the most haunting presence of all. The Stoics understood this long before psychology gave it language. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." When a man seeks to pull you into petty conflict, to rattle your spirit with provocation, your silence denies him the satisfaction of victory. It says, "Your chaos does not move me. Your noise does not shape me. I remain sovereign." That sovereignty unsettles him because he cannot penetrate it, cannot break it, cannot bend it to his will. And so he obsesses, because obsession is what arises when power slips beyond reach. For many men, a woman's silence carries the weight of the mother archetype. It is not just her absence they feel, but the ancient absence of the nurturing figure who could not, or would not, offer unconditional love. Silence reactivates those wounds, turns them into fresh ache. He feels small again, abandoned, unworthy. And though he may rage against her, mock her, or dismiss her, inwardly he cannot release the grip of that wound. He circles it endlessly, because his soul craves what it cannot have: resolution. But silence does not resolve, it expands, and the more it expands, the more unforgettable she becomes. There is a sacred discipline in choosing silence. It requires knowing your worth so fully that you no longer barter it with explanations. It requires trusting that truth does not need to be shouted to exist. It requires the courage to be misunderstood and the strength to let someone else's narrative about you remain unchallenged. Can you feel the power in that? To walk away not in bitterness, not in vengeance, but in unshakable stillness. That stillness is what men cannot let go of. It is the mark of a woman who has transcended the ego games that consume lesser spirits. This silence does not shrink you. It enlarges you. It transforms you from a participant in petty conflict into an archetype, a figure of myth. To him, you become not just a woman, but a symbol of everything he cannot control, of everything he secretly desires yet fears, of the mystery that both draws him in and terrifies him. And symbols, once awakened in the psyche, are not forgotten. They live on, repeating in dreams, resurfacing in memory, haunting the edges of consciousness. That is why, long after the noise of drama has faded, the silent woman remains. Not because she chased, but because she refused to. Not because she gave him everything, but because she withheld. Not because she was loud, but because she was still. And in that stillness, she revealed a truth most men spend their lives avoiding: that love cannot be demanded, that worth cannot be negotiated, and that silence is sometimes the loudest statement of all. There comes a point where silence ceases to be absence and becomes initiation. The woman who chooses stillness over conflict initiates the man into the deepest confrontation of his own psyche. She does not scream to be heard. She vanishes into presence. And, in doing so, she does not merely leave him. She leaves him with himself. That is why he cannot let go, because she is not just a woman he lost. She is the moment he lost the illusion of control. In Jungian terms, she becomes the anima he cannot integrate, the living symbol of what his soul longs for but cannot possess. She embodies the archetype of the eternal feminine, not the compliant caretaker, not the reactive partner, but the sovereign force who refuses to be consumed by his projections. He obsesses because her silence prevents him from collapsing her into a role. He cannot call her the victim because she refused to play it. He cannot call her the aggressor because she offered no battle. She remains undefined, ungraspable, and therefore eternal in his mind. Consider what this silence does to the ego. The male ego thrives on closure. It wants the chapter to end neatly, with triumph or defeat, so that it can move on to the next conquest. But the silent woman does not grant that ending. She leaves the story open, unresolved, and the unresolved becomes obsession. The ego gnaws at the silence like a locked door it cannot break through. He dreams of what she might have said, of the argument she never made, of the emotions she never revealed. The fantasies become louder than reality, because reality never concluded. And so she lingers, not because she begged for remembrance, but because she denied it. This is why, if you look closely, many men return in cycles to the woman, who once withdrew without drama. They may not confess it. They may even mock her outwardly to friends, reduce her silence to indifference. But internally, they circle back. They test the waters, send the message, appear at the threshold. Not because of love alone, but because their psyche cannot tolerate the riddle of being left with questions unanswered. Her silence became a myth, and myths demand revisiting. What does this mean for the woman herself? It means she must recognize that her silence is not emptiness, but mastery. It is the embodiment of Marcus Aurelius's discipline, the unshakable strength that refuses to be drawn into battles unworthy of her soul. By stepping back from drama, she steps into sovereignty. She embodies individuation, the Jungian process of becoming whole, of aligning with her higher self rather than being trapped in the cycles of reaction. She does not need to prove, to defend, to fight for recognition. Her silence proves that she already knows who she is. And you, hearing this, may feel the weight of your own patterns. Perhaps you have wasted energy trying to be heard by someone who only thrived on noise. Perhaps you have poured yourself into explanations, arguments, desperate pleas for understanding, only to discover that the more you spoke, the less you were truly seen. Silence is not abandonment of communication. It is the highest form of communication. It says, I no longer place my worth in your ability to comprehend me. It says, I exist beyond your narrative. It says, I will not trade my peace for your chaos. There is an almost sacred eroticism in this silence. It is not coldness. It is depth. It transforms the woman into mystery. And mystery is the force that pulls at the masculine unconscious more than anything else. She becomes like the moon, distant, untouchable, illuminating without explaining. And the man, bound by instinct, cannot stop looking upward, cannot stop wondering, cannot stop circling what he cannot claim. Her silence turns her into something timeless, and in that timelessness, she becomes unforgettable. Yet here is the paradox. She does not choose silence to haunt him. She chooses it to free herself. She does not withdraw to trap him in longing. She withdraws to protect her soul. His obsession is merely the byproduct of her liberation. Because in a world where women are trained to over-explain, over-give, over-sacrifice, the choice to remain silent is rebellion. It is reclamation. It is the boldest statement of all. I am enough without defending myself. And when that realization sinks in, when her silence becomes rooted in inner knowing rather than wounded retreat, she steps into her truest power. The kind of power that does not need to chase, that does not need to prove, that simply radiates. A power that men cannot release because it awakens something deeper in them than attraction. It awakens the confrontation with truth itself. There is a haunting beauty in the kind of silence that is not born of fear, but of sovereignty. The woman who embraces it walks away not to escape, but to rise above. She denies the theater of chaos its final act, and in doing so, she denies him the resolution his ego craves. This is why he cannot let her go, because she left him with the most dangerous force of all, his own unfinished story. And nothing torments the human psyche more than the story without an ending. Jung taught that the unconscious will circle endlessly around what remains unresolved. It does not release what it cannot integrate. And so the man who once believed himself strong finds himself pulled into orbit around the silent woman's absence. He replays her stillness like a riddle, searching for meaning. Was she indifferent, or was she wiser than him? Did she leave because she no longer cared, or because she cared too deeply to reduce herself to conflict? He obsesses not over her body, not even over her love, but over the mystery her silence created. And mystery, when it takes root in the soul, never lets go. This is why, in dreams and waking thoughts alike, she lingers. She becomes an archetype, something larger than life, a figure he cannot confine to memory alone. She becomes the symbol of restraint, of dignity, of the eternal feminine untouchable by his need for dominance. She does not return his energy. She reflects it back to him. And when he looks into her silence, he sees not her, but himself. His wounds, his unhealed shadow, his fragile ego trembling before a woman who no longer bends. For the woman, silence is liberation. It is the refusal to carry the burden of educating a man who does not want to listen. It is the rejection of wasting sacred energy and proving worth to someone blind to it. It is the highest act of self-preservation, and beyond that, self-revelation. When she chooses silence, she affirms that her voice is not a commodity to be bartered in the marketplace of someone else's approval. She affirms that her peace matters more than his. Perception. She affirms that her life is too expansive to shrink into a battlefield of egos. This does not mean her silence is cold. Quite the opposite. It is radiant with depth. It is the silence of the mountain, still unshakable, yet holding entire worlds within it. It is the silence of the ocean at midnight, dark, vast, unknowable, impossible to master. It is the silence of a flame that does not roar, yet burns eternally. And man, in his restless nature, cannot release what he cannot conquer. He cannot walk away from the fire that did not consume him, because he fears he will never find its warmth again. Have you ever noticed how noise is forgotten, but stillness endures? How the words shouted in anger fade quickly, but the moment someone turns away in silence echoes for years. This is the power of restraint. It is the reason Marcus Aurelius wrote that silence is a lesson learned from the many sufferings of life. The silent woman embodies that lesson. She does not silence herself to appease. She silences herself to transcend. And in that transcendence, she touches the realm of the eternal, the realm where no man can follow unless he too confronts his shadows. The tragedy for him is that most men do not. They circle the silence instead of entering it. They fixate on her absence instead of their own wounds. They chase her memory instead of facing themselves. And so they remain bound, unable to let go, enslaved not by her, but by the unconscious truths her silence revealed. She is free. He is haunted. That is the difference between one who chooses silence and one who resists it. And so the story closes not with vengeance, but with revelation. For the woman, silence is not a weapon against him. It is a gift to herself. It is her rebirth, her reclamation, her shield. It is the threshold where she crosses from need into wholeness. And for him, her silence is not simply absence. It is the mirror he cannot shatter, the truth he cannot bury, the presence he cannot forget. Long after her footsteps have faded, the silence she carried remains louder than any words could have ever been. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.